everybody, and welcome to First Level Topic. Today what we're going to be doing is a fun science activity continuing with our theme that we've been working on this week of patterns. This type of pattern is something that we all have on our own bodies. Can you guess what it is? Everybody's pattern is totally unique, totally different to you. Have you guessed it? It's the patterns we have on our fingertips, our fingerprint pattern. So we're going to learn some more about how fingerprints are made, why we've all got different fingerprints, and how you can discover what type of fingerprints you have, and maybe be a little detective and see if you can solve some crimes at home. So lots of different things to keep you involved this afternoon. As I go through the presentation, you can stop at any time because you may need to get some equipment together so that you can make some fingerprints. The equipment's easy to find at home, and some things are a little bit tricky to do, but practice makes perfect. Just have a go and have fun and learn about fingerprint patterns and see if you can identify the different types. So what I'm going to do now is put on a presentation and talk through that. There's also a short video to watch as well, and then there's some activities for you to do. So I hope you enjoy it. So we're going to be talking about fingerprint patterns. Every person in the world possesses a unique set of fingerprints. Unique means that they are particular just to you, your own set of fingerprints. Nobody else has the same ones. It means that everyone's fingerprints are different, even if you're an identical twin. Next, there's going to be a video to explain how our fingerprints actually form and why they are all different.
Hi, this is David from Minute Earth, and these are my fingerprints. Each one has a particular pattern on it, a whirl, a loop, an arch, or in the case of my left thumb, a somewhat rarer double loop whirl. But even if your left thumb print has one of the boring patterns, your print is unique to you. In fact, there's no one in the world, past, present, or future, who has a fingerprint that matches any one of yours. To understand why, we first need to know how they form. Early on in fetal development, lumps of stem cell tissues called volar pads grow under the skin on each finger. Whether the volar pad is small or big or off to the side or grows unevenly determines the main pattern of the fingerprint. An arch, a whirl, a loop, or even a very interesting and exciting double loop whirl. Because your volar pad size and orientation is somewhat genetic, many relatives and most identical twins have the same main patterns on each finger, and so DNA alone isn't where the uniqueness of fingerprints comes from. Instead, it comes from the chaotic way in which the fingerprints grow. On top of the volar pads, the embryonic skin has several layers of cells, all growing at different rates. And as the inner layer grows, the middle layer buckles, causing ridges to form in the upper layer. The ridges first form parallel to the three areas of greatest stress on a growing finger: near the fingernail, near the crease at the first joint, and on top of the volar pads. As the ridge lines grow, they sometimes run into one another, resulting in either a block or a split. The details of precisely where on the finger those ridge lines meet up and whether each one gets turned into a dead end or a fork is determined by a bunch of different factors, like how nerves and capillaries grow in the layer below the skin, fluid pressure changes in the womb, and even which direction the finger is oriented relative to gravity. And because there are chaotic and unpredictable differences in each of these, whether a given ridge becomes a dead end or a fork is essentially random, even for babies that develop in the same womb. The average person has around 50 forks or dead ends at different places on each fingerprint. Even if you oversimplify things, ignoring position and so on, and just think of each of these points as an independent coin flip between fork and dead end, there are more than a quadrillion different possibilities for fingerprints. To get a sense of how many possibilities that is, there are 80 billion fingerprints in the world, which are represented by this black dot. A quadrillion is 10,000 times larger. And remember, this is a simplification because the number of potential unique fingerprints gets way bigger when you take into account the relative positions of these points. So my left thumbprint and all my fingerprints and all your fingerprints are each pretty much mathematically guaranteed to be unique, to be the only ones in the world.
Wow, that shows how different fingerprints are formed. What a lot of numbers there were there and how big they were. That just shows us how different all these fingerprints are and how complex they are. The differences in the fingerprints can be really small, really slight. The scientific study of fingerprints is known as dactylography. By studying the arrangement, shape, size, and number of the lines in each fingerprint, the fingerprint patterns can be put into three main groups. And that's what you're going to try and do with your fingerprints. You're going to see if you can work out which of the three main groups each of your fingerprints fits into. So these three groups are loops, whorls, and arches. You can see the different shapes here. Loops make up almost 70% of fingerprint patterns, so this pattern is the most common. So you're bound to have some of your fingers with this type of pattern. There's two different types of loop, one called an ulnar loop. All this means is the loop shape flows like a waterfall and it looks like it's flowing towards your little finger. The opposite one to that is the radial loop, and this one looks like it's flowing towards your thumb. Obviously, you'll need to check which hand you took the fingerprint from to see whether it's flowing towards the thumb or the pinky finger. Arches are only found in about 5% of the patterns, so not very many at all. And they're lines that slope upwards and then down, so they look like a small hill. There's a simple arch, which has a smooth curved top, or then one that looks more pointed, looks a bit like a tent. So this pattern looks like a camping tent with a sharp tip at the top. Then we've got whorls. These form about 25% of all patterns. That's a quarter. And they're circular or spiral patterns. The one that's shown here is a concentric whorl, which shows circles one inside the other. And then we have a spiral whorl where you can see it's as if the line starts in the center of the fingerprint and then spirals outwards. So that's our three basic types: loops, whorls, or arches. There's sometimes more complicated ones, which are a mixture of the different patterns, just like the gentleman on the video spoke about having a strange one on one of his thumbs. But these are the basic ones, and that's what we're looking out for. Now, to find out what your fingerprints look like, the first thing you can do is actually look at your fingerprints. You can look at your fingertips and look really, really carefully. You might have a magnifying glass at home which could help you do this. Or you can make some fingerprints and then you can study them to see if you can spot the pattern. There's different ways you can do this, so let's have a look at those. First of all, the best thing to do is draw around your hand on a piece of paper. You're going to use this to record the different fingerprint patterns you find for each of your fingers. I would suggest to draw around the hand that you don't write with. So if you're right-handed, put your left hand on a piece of plain paper and draw around the fingers. Spread your fingers out so it's easy to draw in between them. If you're left-handed, it's the opposite way around. Put your right hand on the piece of paper and draw around. So now we've got a picture of your hand and we can try and identify what each of your fingers patterns is. So we've got our thumb, we've got our fore or index finger, you've got your middle finger, the tall one, and you've got your ring finger, and then you've got your pinky, the little one at the end. This is one way of doing it. On a different piece of paper from the one that you've drawn your hand, scribble really hard with a pencil so you end up with just a big grey area. And if you rub over this, you'll find that that grey colour comes off on your hands. I'm sure you've done this when you've been doing art or been writing really a lot at school. So once you've got a lovely grey area, rub one of your fingers around in the graphite until it's covered with that grey. Then put a piece of sticky tape over the print and lift the grey off. Stick that tape to the correct finger on the outline of your hand. Do this with each of your fingers. So then you can go back to the pictures and start looking to see which pattern it is. Remember, there's the loop, there's the whorl, or there's an arch shape. Another way of getting your fingerprints is also by dipping your fingertips into a powder. You could use talcum powder or flour or icing sugar. Then put a piece of sticky tape over the powder and you'll get an instant fingerprint. Be careful when you do this that you haven't got too much powder on the end of your finger or you just end up with a big thick mess. You need to check that you can see the pattern. It's actually quite a nice way of looking at the patterns on your fingerprints because you can see them clearly marked out by the powder. And again, stick the tape down. You might want to do it on a dark piece of paper if you're using this method so that the white powder shows up well. Here you go, here's a picture of one. So you can see that the white powder has stuck to the tape and there you can quite clearly see the fingerprint pattern. Can you see the shape? Let's have a look. Let me get the pointer. Can you see how here? So I think what we've got there is Oops, let's go back. Is a loop shape. Our skin contains oils, which means we leave fingerprints on surfaces we touch. I bet your mum's criticised you for doing that before. They show up best on shiny or smooth surfaces such as china, glass, or a mirror. So you may have left fingerprints on something shiny like a mirror or the windows at home, and somebody's had to clean them off. You might find some fingerprints on smooth surfaces at home. There might be one on the fridge door or the sweetie cupboard door. You can brush these gently with powder and then lift them off with some sticky tape. See who's been there before you. Now it's time to turn detective. The police have used fingerprints as a way of identifying criminals for many, many years. Because our fingerprints are individual to us, by matching the fingerprints to the person, it means that's the criminal. That's the person who committed the crime. So, how about some members of your family pick up a glass, a clear glass? They'll leave some fingerprints on it. They mustn't tell you who picked up which glass, but you should now have some fingerprint evidence to try and find out which glass belongs to which person. If you dust them with powder, remember you can use talcum powder or icing sugar or flour. You might want to dust it on with a fine brush. So dust them. Lift it off with a piece of sticky tape, stick the tape down onto some dark paper and try and work out who picked up the glass. Learning about fingerprints is an interesting science, but it's also fun. So see how well you get on. You'll probably get better at making the fingerprints as you go along. It's quite tricky at first, but spotting those different patterns, and it's really quite fascinating that we all have totally different fingerprints. Okay, so I hope that's told you a little bit about fingerprints and patterns that we have on our skin. Isn't that amazing? So have fun with fingerprints and see what you can discover. It'd be nice to see if anybody's been really successful and wants to share pictures of what they have done. Thank you very much.